Hello there, and welcome to Speaking of Our Words, radio programming that brings you the wide range of voices, stories, and forms of local writers, and offering you some insight into their creative process. My name is Dave Gourdoux. I'm a member of the Kenosha Writers Guild, and I am your host. We have several guests today, so why don't we just get right into it. First up, we have Irene BIlak. Irene, how are you today?
Well, I'll pretend that I'm wonderful. Thank you for asking.
That's about as good as anybody can do.
Yes.
And what have you got to read for us?
I have a sort of a memoir of the time when I decided to become a teacher.
Okay, take it away.
I called it Always a Teacher. I was just a little kid, 5 years old, but I got to know so much very soon because I was curious and enjoyed learning. Mama told me many stories. My parents told me that I went to preschool in Ukraine. I don't remember this, but my mom was very good at telling me stories and reading to me. She would hold me on her lap and illustrate the characters she was talking about. I still remember her drawings. I think it was the memory, a very strong memory, because she had me on her lap drawing, and I felt comfortable, warm, and loved. My father would tell me stories of his travels, and he traveled a lot. There were many stories. My brothers, who were considerably older than I, 8 and 10 years older, also talked to me often and played with me. Because we became immigrants in 1949 and lived in barracks in Austria, this is where I first went to formal school in the Ukrainian language with 1 hour of required Austrian. My parents sent me to first grade there. At 6, I was ready, but they did not like it. It was September, and it was very hot, very hot. The smell of the chalk made me nauseous. I had a headache and wanted to go home. As it was only half a day, I stuck it out to the end. "How did you like school?" my mother asked. "It was awful," I replied, and then I told her about the stifling heat, the smell, and the small classroom which was part of a long barrack. "Do I have to go tomorrow? It is much nicer being outside, going to the meadow and playing with my friends." "Ah, all your friends are in school, except the little ones you like to sometimes play with," said Mama. "They'll do. I like my preschool friends." Or, "Mom, I have an idea. Let's have my cousin from Kitzbühel, Tyrol, go to the first grade for me. When the teacher takes attendance, my cousin Irene can say, 'Here.' She has the same first and last name as I do. Of course you know that." "Maybe she would do this for me, even just once," I exclaimed. "Okay, enough," said Mother. "Go play now. Get it out of your system." I happily went skipping all the way. Some distance away from our barracks was a verdant meadow full of wild flowers and tall grasses. I lay down on the grass, closing my eyes. A cool breeze from the forest and mountains helped me enjoy the lovely freshness of the morning. Soon my little friends, who had been in preschool, came out and joined me. We played catch, hide and seek, and then I had them sit down so I could teach them math. "How much is 1 plus 1?" I asked. Little Nina said, 2, proudly. "How much is 2 plus 2? Teddy yelled, 4. This went on for a while. Sonia brought a book. "Please read this," she begged. It was a colorfully illustrated text called Little Red Riding Hood. I knew the story well, and though I was just in first grade, I could already read. My group of 4 cute little kids sat down on the grass and listened while I read and showed them the pictures. However, one day a terrible thing occurred when I played hooky, sort of. My mother wanted me to go to an important errand, which was for my benefit. The seamstress was making my first communion dress and insisted that the only time she had was during my school time. I did not mind. The seamstress finished my measurements quickly and said goodbye. I was free. Between the school and the field was a public playground. This was going to be an obstacle for me. Should I stop or go home? The swings were very inviting. I could swing just a little, I thought. How was I to know that the teacher was taking my class on an outing in the field? She saw me on the swing and reprimanded me loudly for missing school. The catechist, who had just finished with the religion class, was along. "Why are you swinging on a swing when you should be in school?" he reprimanded. I quickly jumped off. He took the swing by the ropes, which had a fabric seat, and hit me with it. I was shocked, not from the pain, but from the embarrassment. The kids in my class did not sympathize with me at all. They laughed. This was also a time when you did not argue with your parents or your teachers, and especially not with the priest. He had punished me once before in class by having me kneel in the corner for not knowing the prayer, Our Father, by memory. I held a grudge against him all my life, although I became very religious and faithful to my Byzantine Catholic rite. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, and then joined the class. We listened to the teacher telling us about the tall Alpine mountains just ahead and behind us, and why there was snow at the top. I could not look anyone in the eye, but I listened attentively, feeling very much chastened. Yet, look what happened. That's how it all started. All my young life, I dreamed of becoming a teacher, even though I did not always enjoy every minute. And because I became an English speaker in the United States of America, there was one caveat. My mother thought I should teach older students in high school, not little ones. Being the dutiful daughter, I obeyed. In University of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I majored in secondary education, which became my lifelong career. It was a successful profession for over 20 years. Being a drama coach and teaching English, history, literature, and directing junior high youngsters on the stage was very rewarding. It was a collaborative effort with other teachers, musicians, and even a student director who wanted to learn the craft, earning extra credit in the high school next door. We performed Oklahoma, Annie Get Your Gun, and Annie. There was a play every year. My first year before this, in Palatine, Illinois, I directed a one-act play called The Mystery of Moldy Manor. There were also Christmas and other holiday pageants. Students loved getting on stage and performing. Several students were involved with props and scenery, and the parents helped with costumes. In my literature classes, we often acted out the stories we read, as well as a play about Narnia, which was in our anthology. Children were resourceful and brought props from home as well as scarves, coats, or hats to make the dramatics very believable. This was Northbrook. Children had many wonderful material things at their disposal. I was young, enthusiastic, and put my heart and soul in all the plays. Terrific memories now, of course, good and bad ones. There was that kid in 6th grade remedial reading who said he wouldn't do his homework. He said he could not see well during independent reading time. I placed a small lamp on his desk. This did not satisfy him. He would not do reading. I placed a small lamp on his desk, which lit up nicely, and of course he remembered to turn it on or off whenever he felt like it. He would not read anyway. I gently spoke with him. He was arrogant and said he did not have to read just because I gave the students reading time. He would do it at home. "Why did you not hand in your writing journal?" I asked. "I didn't feel like it," he quipped. When I insisted, he asked the principal for an appointment, to which his father also came. The parents were divorced, and my student wanted attention any way he could get it. I won out with this meeting with the student, principal, and the parent, but only after a grueling session. And there was that gifted student whom I invited to bring his guitar and do an accompaniment to his classmates' poetry readings. When he was not getting attention, he acted out and also insisted on a meeting with the principal, parents, and the whole team of 7th grade teacher, and also his counselor. Unbelievable. We got through it, but we're very grateful when the student moved to the 8th grade. Good luck to that team of teachers. Before all this, when my sons were preschool age, I taught them with 20 other pupils in a Ukrainian preschool in Chicago 3 times a week. You should have seen the kids' eyes when I told them stories of Little Red Riding Hood, the 3 Little Pigs, the Mittens, Snow White, and the 7 Dwarfs, and others. This was fun for me and the children. I acted out the narrations using puppets and even the pupils. Their eyes and clapping showed me their enthusiasm and gratitude. Parents were pleased and bought me gifts in appreciation at holiday time. In both preschool and junior high, the experiences were life memorable. The financial situation in Northbrook was excellent as well, as we had a good union. Now I have a good pension. It was all worthwhile. Even the teaching of students at Oakton Community College was fascinating. This time, I had adult students. One of the male students wanted a better grade and tried to solicit a friendship. I was only 30-some years old. What a guy. It's been a great ride.
Thank you, Irene. That was very good. That was Irene BIlak, and you're listening to Speaking of Our Words. Okay, next up, we have a piece from a regular contributor, Richard Bell, who once again couldn't be here, so I'll try and read this. So this is called Getting Older, and it's from Richard's book, Life Seemed Good, But, available on Amazon and many other outlets, I'm sure. So here goes, Getting Older. Weird Charles stood extremely close to the bathroom mirror, staring at his tired reflection in the morning light. There was no doubt the mole was getting bigger. It was brown, the size of a pencil eraser, on his neck an inch below his jawbone on the left side. His mind told him things he did not want to hear. He was getting older and wiser, for sure, but he did not want to get older. He wanted to stay young and healthy, not turn into a grizzled old grandpa with arthritis, wrinkles, moles, and hair growing out of strange places. As a side note, he enjoyed seeing how many different weird faces he could make at himself in the mirror. Try it sometime, seriously. Charles was also one of those individuals who compulsively counted objects and attempted to make the count come out to an even number. Even was good, odd was bad, and he presumed everyone understood that. In fact, he was so sure that others would be mocking him for only having one mole that he decided to see a doctor. Dr. Carroll was at her desk when Charles burst into her private office with the receptionist at his heels, telling him he needed an appointment. He sat in a chair and said, "You're a real doctor, right?" Dr. Carroll tried not to appear alarmed and assessed him silently. The receptionist continued to scold him, and when Charles refused to budge, she left to phone the police. He smiled at the doctor, using his telepathy on her and tapping his chin nervously with his fingers. He turned his head to give her a view of the mole, but wasn't sure how to put things into words other than, "I have an odd problem." A very perceptive Dr. Carroll was staring at Charles to see what he would do next when she noticed the mole. "I can help you," she stated plainly. "You must have that mole removed from your neck, or have another one like it on the other side." Charles stopped breathing. She understood. By a strange coincidence, you will only find here. When she was younger, she had also had the obsession, but had mostly grown out of it. Come to think of it, I'm pretty sure most people actually do believe even is better than odd, so maybe not such a coincidence after all. "I was hoping you would understand," he said. Dr. Carroll stood up and walked around to examine his mole. Yep, it could easily be removed, but would be quite expensive because our practice was part of a huge health maintenance organization run by hundreds of overpaid administrators who did nothing but invent elaborate billing codes to impress their insurance company friends. May I see your ID and insurance card? She asked politely, in order to schedule an MRI and a series of blood tests and other unnecessary diagnostics. Oh, I don't need insurance, he chuckled, thinking of his huge, empty water bottle at home filled with coins. Charles confided to her that he had been monitoring Mr. Mole closely in the mirror for months, whereupon she counseled him that if one stands too close to the mirror, one does not get the full picture of who one is. It went right over his head. Dr. Carroll sat down, and Charles shared with her some of his unique mirror faces and bombarded her with more telepathic messages until the police arrived. The cops took him and his moles to the station and locked them in a pink padded cell. A day later, he went before a judge who had a similar mole. Charles imagined that the judge was mocking him and grew angry. He was convicted of trespassing and sentenced to psychiatric counseling and time served. On his way out of the courtroom, Weird Charles turned and shouted, "Mole! Mole! Mole!" at the old judge until he was out of earshot. Yes, he was getting older, but not much wiser. And that's Richard's. That's Richard.
Yeah, that's... He's something wrong with that man.
So next up we've got Darleen Coleman. Darleen, what have you got for us today?
I have a little story that it's based on a true incident. And it is called, the title is Dinner at Julia's, Bloody Eyes, and the Trouble with Cheese.
Oh my goodness. Sounds like a Bob Katzman title. Okay, take it away.
The scene and characters. An old friend from my Chicago days recently became a new Kenosha neighbor and invited me over for grilled burgers, veggie for me, cow for her, and her 87-year-old mother who was visiting from Colorado. We sat out in the backyard on the flagstone patio, sipping cold drinks and nibbling on cheese and crackers, as her little dogs, Rue, a border collie mix, and Yeti, a 14-year-old Tibetan spaniel with one eye, sniffed around the yard. When the burgers were done, Julia suggested we come in to load up our plates and then return to the lovely patio to eat. The dogs would be fine, she said. Just as I'd slathered my veggie burger with condiments and loaded my plate with chips and homemade coleslaw, there was a commotion in the backyard, sounding somewhat between a recalcitrant lawnmower and a thunderstorm, which quickly escalated to wretched yelps and ear-piercing screams. Enter the inciting incident. Cheese. Julia bolted out the kitchen door and came back cradling Yeti, whose one remaining eye was spurting blood. It looked like the tray of hors d'oeuvres had exploded. Bits of bloody cheese lay on the ground, surrounded by Triscuit shards. Rue looked guilty. It seems she has a bit of a reactivity problem around food, and Julia had forgotten about the snacks left out. Let us just say the cheese did not stand alone for long. Tone. Did your kids make up names for stuff? Mine did, and sickinating was a favorite. The tone here is sickinating. The regular vet's office was closed, of course. Dogs rarely arrange these things so that they don't necessitate an expensive trip to the emergency vet miles away in Racine. Yeti, bundled in a lovely peach-colored towel, sure to be relegated to the dog pile after this event, screamed and yelped the entire 10.5 miles to the doggy ER. I drove, and between murmuring calming sounds to her distressed dog, Julia related a detailed story of how Yeti had lost his other eye. I had to ask her to stop when I was on the brink of upchucking out the window. Having been married to a heart surgeon, I'd endured years of dinner-time stories about gross things that happened in the operating room. I can take vivid descriptions of blood and guts, but do not speak to me of eyeballs. Rising action. When we arrived, there was only one couple waiting with a small black cat who didn't look particularly sick. The staff triaged Yeti in, and after a cursory exam, happily pronounced that the eye had not come out of the socket. Oh, geez. But that the tissue around it was very swollen, and there were puncture wounds both above and below the eye. It would take maybe a half hour to attend to the wound. Julia and I settled in the waiting room and talked. Turns out Julia and Yeti were at this very ER just days ago after Yeti binge vomited after a nice helping of cow manure he discovered in the garden. That had been nothing more than a tummy ache, and the bill had been $300. Her mom had gifted her money so Julia could buy a new dishwasher for her newly acquired old bungalow. Looks like my friend will be washing dishes by hand for a while longer. As we chatted, stopping periodically and breathing deeply when Yeti's screams escaped the back treatment room, a man carried in a small tan dog wrapped in a blanket, calmly telling the receptionist it'd been hit by an ATV, but not, he stressed, run over by the tires. His wife and kids came in a moment later, and they too pointed out that although the ATV had run over the dog, the tires had not. The small pup was triaged in, and the family took seats in the waiting room. Julia tried to call her mom's cell phone to make sure the 87-year-old was okay, but her mom habitually kept her cell turned off, despite admonitions from Julia and her siblings. Something else to worry about as we waited to hear more about Yeti's condition. A pretty blonde came in with a tiny Yorkie nestled in a poofy little dog bed. The woman was smiling, and the Yorkie seemed unperturbed. They checked in and sat to wait. Then a rather large man came in carrying an ancient beagle in a blanket. It didn't look good. The man already had tears streaming down his face. The flat-screen TV was turned to a situation comedy, but no one in the waiting room was smiling now. Even the pretty blonde, who quietly told the story of how the Yorkie had been attacked by a dog earlier in the week. Now its drainage tube was precariously hanging from the wound. Falling action. We sat for hours. Julia and I caught up on the 35 years since we'd worked together at the Humane Society in Chicago. She kept apologizing for the meal I'd missed. No need. Food was the last thing on my mind. We saw the couple that had been sitting with the black cat leave without him. Julia's phone rang. It was her mom, who suddenly thought to turn on her phone to see what was taking us so long. While Julia got her mom up to date, I thought about all the animals I'd loved and cared for and lost, some at emergency vets like this one. I thought of my 2 dogs waiting at home in the dark now, about how they were brought up north from East Texas 4 years ago by a rescue group in Chicago, and about the truth that those dogs had, in fact, rescued me. As we were finally ready to leave, a barefoot girl no older than 12 came up behind us and waited politely for a minute before clearing her throat and stepping forward to say her dog had just been attacked, was bleeding, and could someone please come help? The vet tech rushed out to the car. Moments later, the girl's dad, pale and shaking, stepped through the door with a black poodle bundled in a towel. The girl explained it still had stitches in from the last time it was attacked. The dad added that they had an electronic fence, and they'd let the poodle out alone, and well, yes, they did have coyotes and all manner of wildlife in the area. Cue a collective eye roll here. Well, at least they brought it to the vet. Resolution. The family with the small tan dog huddled around a stainless steel table in an exam room off to the left for well over an hour. We caught a glimpse every time one of them left the room or came back in, blowing their noses and wiping their eyes. We heard the receptionist tell them to take as much time as they needed. Finally, they filed out of the room, all of them sobbing, the father clutching the empty blanket to his chest. The receptionist apologized for our long wait and quietly said it'd been a rough night. 3 of the animals brought in had died. Yeti's volume was down to a whimper when the vet tech brought her out. Poor baby. Julia paid the bill, another $300. Poor Julia. I see dishpan hands in her future. Morals of the story. Time spent with a good friend is never wasted. It's a blessing to laugh together, worry together, be there for one another through dinner parties gone awry, dogs getting attacked, and putting up with elderly parents who won't keep their cell phones turned on. It's a good day if you can leave the animal ER with your pet in better shape than when you brought him in. People with pets best keep a steady supply of blankets and towels. And this one last thing, what if? What if we were all vegans? Would the world be a kinder, gentler place without such bellicose foods? Is it possible? Could we survive without our cheese? Maybe if we moved out of state.
Thank you, Darleen. That was very, very good. I like the way you labeled the parts of the story, and so it kind of invited us into your world as you were writing it. So we're seeing the writing of the story at the same time we're being told the story. It was very, very effective.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Darleen. That was Darleen Coleman, and you're listening to Speaking of Her Words. Next up, we have a new member of the Writers Guild, Kristin Stuckmeyer. Got that right, didn't I?
Yep, you got it.
So let's take a minute or two and tell us a little bit about yourself. What kind of things you write and...
Okay, I'm a little all over the place with my writing. I've done essays, and I'm going to read a couple of those today. And I've also been starting some novels under a pen name, Kristin McGlynn, just to differentiate the two different areas that I'm writing in. Mm-hmm. But today I have one novel or one essay that is for my music students. Everybody that I teach music to has to do something called Winter Progress, where they do a recital. So I thought it might be encouraging for them to know that everyone starts somewhere. So I wrote about my first recital.
Okay. So let's, without further ado, Kristin Stuckmeyer.
All right. This is called How I Was Bitten by the Performance Bug. I began piano lessons when I was 10. It wasn't because my parents saw such promising talent or anything. Still, their motivations were loving. They put me into piano lessons at a doctor's recommendation because I had coordination issues. But that's a story for another time. From the moment the piano first came into our home, I wanted to learn to play it. We inherited an old upright piano from a relative who no longer used it. It was on loan, my mother said. Its dark stained wood had a large ugly burn mark on the top. My mom cleverly covered the mark with a placemat and our stereo. Despite the burn, the keys worked just fine, and it sounded rather good after it was tuned. I loved to play from the first. More than my siblings, I often wandered over to play when I had some free time. I learned the songs my friends, who didn't even know how to truly play, knew. Things like Heart and Soul Duet or little ditties where you rolled your closed fist over the black keys. Other times I tried to play my favorite songs by ear. As I said, I was no prodigy, but my love for the instrument made me tenacious in my efforts to learn. Our neighbor had some old piano books and a long piece of cardboard that had a picture of the keyboard with all the names of the keys printed on it. That cardboard was my gateway to playing on my own. Put upright into the narrow space behind the keys, it allowed me to find the keys whose names were printed inside of the notes of the beginner book that they had also lent us. My parents watched my explorations with kind eyes. They never deterred my love of playing. Of course, my 3 siblings, it was a different matter. "Get the cat off the piano," my brothers would mockingly yell as I tried to figure out how to play Blow the Man Down. In all honesty, it probably did sound a bit like a cat on the keys. Still, our family always had a mocking sense of humor. Sometimes I laughed at them. Other times I yelled, verbally trying to give as good as I got. After about a year of begging for lessons, my parents finally gave me what I had been wishing for. It may have been doctor recommended, but with 4 children, our budget was tight. Maybe they wanted to make sure I was truly dedicated to learning. Maybe the teachers in the area said they didn't start students before they were 10. I honestly don't know. But I do know I loved lessons. The first lesson was doubly exciting because I got that thing that piano students love the most, new books. It was always exciting to finish one level and get to a new piece of music. Browsing sheet music at the music stores became my second love. It didn't seem to matter how hard I tried. Oops. That was wrong. Much as I loved to play, getting consistent at playing the notes was long and often frustrating process. My clumsy fingers simply didn't seem to want to remember the sequence I tried to teach them. I beat my hands on the piano bench in frustration many a day as I practiced, failed, and then tried again. Before I knew it, I'd been taking lessons for over a semester. After winter break, my teacher started working on finding recital pieces for the upcoming performance in the spring. She had chosen a couple of level-appropriate pieces that she played for me and let me choose from. I decided on a piece called Fancy Frolic by Violet Reiser. I still have the sheet music with the recital time written on it. Looking at it now, it wasn't the easiest of pieces for a first recital. It was almost entirely eighth notes moving rapidly from one hand to the other in 2/4 time. 16th notes abounded on its second page, and there were sharps and flats in every line. Plus, it was 2 pages long, and if you didn't memorize the piece, you didn't perform. No one wanted to be the person who was cut from recital because of not doing the work. The students in my studio were fairly competitive. I practiced that piece until my brain scrambled and my fingers felt rubbery. I was known as a rote memorizer. If I made a mistake, I would go back to the beginning of the piece to correct it. If my flow of memory was interrupted, I would completely lose what came next. When you perform, you run a serious risk. You can get stuck up on stage playing the piece over and over again as you try to correct your mistake. So I would practice, and practice, and practice some more. I never could get through the whole thing without stumbling over a note or two, but thanks to my teacher, I learned to continue playing past the stumbles a little better. My parents must have been biting their nails in fear of the upcoming recital day as they listened to me. I know I would have been if it was my child, because I never did get through the whole piece perfectly in practice. Not once. It didn't seem to matter how hard I tried. The day of the recital finally arrived. We were to perform at the church my family attended. Many of the students were friends of mine from church. Many were from my piano teacher's own brood of 12 children, and everyone brought friends and family to spare. I was the first to perform, as I had the simplest piece and had taken lessons the shortest amount of time. I didn't know that at the time. I saw it as a place of pride. I was glad to get through my piece first so I could relax, because I was very, very nervous. In fact, I was such a wreck right before performing that my mother told me I didn't have to if I didn't want to. I replied, somebody has to. When my time came, I did as I had learned. I walked up to the piano and adjusted the bench just so. I sat a moment with my hands quietly in my lap, mentally preparing, and then I began. My parents must have been praying over every note, because for the first time ever, I played every last one of them perfectly. There wasn't a single stumble, not one. My heart soared as I finished. My face beamed with triumphant smile as I took my bow. And that was it. I was hooked totally and completely by the performance bug. All those frustrating practice sessions where I beat up my piano bench were worth it. I've never performed so perfectly since that first time. It could be because I'm more critical of my performance these days, judging it more than just hitting the right notes. Perhaps it was that I needed divine intervention then the most. Regardless of the reason, I will never forget that first performance and be grateful for the miracle and the memory.
Thank Thank you. That was Kristin Stuckmeyer. You're listening to Speaking of Our Words. That was great, Kristin. That reminded me of a couple of things. One, when my sister took piano lessons, and she played this horrible melody, Tricky Traffic, over and over and over. And I swore that I would be institutionalized if I heard it one more time. And then the part where he got up on the stage and during the recital, and he played it perfectly. It's great. I think what happens sometimes is we're so nervous is that we're ultra focused in those times, and we have our triumphs because we focus in a way that we couldn't if we weren't so nervous. But what do I know?
Yeah, I mean, as you were getting towards your recital, I found, I'm listening to you, and I found myself getting nervous. Well, how are you going to do?
It was a miracle. That's all I can say. It's definitely a miracle.
So,
You have a second piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
okay. So what else do you have for us, Kristin?
I'm sorry?
What else do you have for us?
This one's absolutely, totally nothing about music. It's totally different. I have a daughter who is on the autism spectrum, and I've been training a German Shepherd named Teddy to be an autism service dog for her. We've had him about 3 years now, and this is about a little bit about the journey that we took with that and some of the amazing things that happened with him and some of the not so amazing things that happened since he was in our life.
Great.
So,
And this was published in...
this is published in Chicken Soup for the Soul, My Very Good, My Very Bad Dog. It came out, I want to say 2 years ago. So, but yeah, you can find it pretty much anywhere they sell Chicken Soup for the Soul. The name of this piece is At Your Service. Recently, I went to the movies with my husband and 2 daughters. It was the first time we were able to go on this kind of seemingly commonplace family outing, and it was made possible in large part by a sable-colored German Shepherd named Teddy. Teddy came into our lives about a year ago at 8 weeks old, ready to be trained as an autism service dog for my 9-year-old daughter. Training began the first day we brought Teddy home. There were the basics, of course, with housebreaking, crate training, the good boy list, and the no-no list. And then there was the bonding list. Bonding would involve my daughter interacting with Teddy by feeding, grooming, and snuggling with him, among other things. When she allowed Teddy to snuggle contentedly on her lap for an unheard of 20 minutes during his first week in our home, we were amazed and hopeful. Maybe this wouldn't be as hard as we thought. No such luck. My daughter often struggles with doing anything new. If we had so much as a different-looking workbook page in homeschool, she would have a meltdown, and it could take as long as 3 days to get her to do it calmly. So it was with her bonding tasks. Initially, it was a meltdown just waiting to happen. But after a few months, my daughter began to accept the dog. Now she will calmly feed Teddy if he doesn't listen when she tells him to sit. She will calmly correct Teddy if he doesn't listen when she tells him to sit. And she can bathe him without gagging at the texture of his soapy fur, laughing as he shakes water all over her. She seems to walk taller and more confidently with Teddy by her side. The first formal class Teddy attended introduced him to the most important and oftentimes most difficult lesson a service dog can learn: to lie down and wait calmly until released, no matter what. Young though he was, Teddy's energy was quickly expended, and soon he began to use class time to take a nap. Many times he had to be woken up to take his turn at a task. From that point on, obedience and socialization were the name of the game. As Teddy learned a few commands, my daughter gained a greater rapport with him. Puppy nipping had made my daughter wary of much interaction with Teddy for a time, but his new and improving manners did a lot to help restore my daughter's confidence, and she learned how to politely tell him no. My daughter began doing her reading aloud time with Teddy snuggling by her on the couch. To further increase their bond, she worked while tethered to him and sat at a table for school. As she sat at the table for school, Teddy went out with us as much as possible. Now there were new rules for him to obey. No personal grooming, scratching, or shaking in public. No sniffing, particularly at any food. No eating any food from the floor or offered by strangers. Only greet people when given permission. I started with low-traffic stores that had little to no food around to tempt him. From there, we worked our way up to grocery shopping and finally restaurants. Although Teddy was not always perfect, his eager-to-please disposition helped us greatly with teaching and correcting him. I was often surprised at how easily he handled new situations and stressors. I had been amazed at the difference Teddy made in my daughter's life. One day while running errands, my daughter was tired and resisted going into a store. She was pulling me toward the door, getting louder by the second. I quickly found an empty aisle and sat her on the floor with Teddy for a moment. He leaned against her side, their preferred method of deep pressure. After about a minute, she began to calm and pet him. I asked if she was ready to continue, and she said she was. Just like that. Nothing had ever worked so quickly to calm her in the past. What could have become a major meltdown was alleviated in a minute. Not only did she complete the errand after that, but she was laughing and happy. After this first year in training, my daughter is already so much calmer about dealing with loud noises with Teddy around. In the past, we have barely succeeded in getting my daughter to enter theater because of the loudness. This time, she went in confidently with no hesitation. Despite this being Teddy's first experience, he didn't hesitate either. At one point during the movie, I moved Teddy down to a lower step from where we were sitting, thinking he was squishing my daughter's legs. My daughter responded to this by moving onto the floor to sit beside him. I got the message. She wanted him touching her. She needed that reassurance. I felt hope blossoming more fully in me as I saw one of my dreams realized in the wonder of having the whole family together at the movies. For months after the event, my daughter still talked about her experience at the movies, often saying, "What's your favorite movie?" Her way of asking us to guess her favorite movie. And what movie did we see that is now her favorite? It's called Max, about a boy and his German Shepherd.
Wow. Dogs are just incredible. I'm convinced they're the highest species on Earth sometimes. They're so loyal. That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I didn't know that. Is this a thing where dogs are used as therapy dogs for autism people?
Well, there's difference between therapy dogs and service dogs.
Oh, okay.
So a service dog is for an individual, whereas a therapy dog may go into a place like a nursing home or a hospital and help several people. And service dogs are allowed places that therapy dogs are not. And people who have service dogs are pretty particular about it because our rights are always threatened by people who abuse it. So.
Okay, so are service dogs a thing for people with autism?
I'm sorry. Absolutely. There is a place called Custom Canines that helps a lot of people that I know in the autism community. There's a lot of people with labradoodles around from Custom Canines that their dogs have just opened up whole new worlds for their families where they're able to go out in public. It calms them and grounds them. And they have to know how to do certain tasks, in order to be qualified as a service dog. They're not just a pet. So.
Right.
It's a lot of training.
Right. Oh, interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Really well. Thank you, Kristin. Next up, we've got Ron Larson. Ron, you've got a book that's going to be published here shortly?
Yes. It's called Wisconsin in the Civil War. Be published by the History Press, which is out of Charleston, South Carolina. They're part of Arcadia Publishing, which you may have heard of.
Oh, yeah.
They do like local, regional, cultural history, and if you were to do a, like there's like they think they did one like Postcards of Kenosha or something,
Right.
So yeah, they're publishing it the Monday after Thanksgiving. So I've been working on it for about a year and a half, and it's there.
Congratulations.
Great, thank you.
And what have you got to read for us today?
Well, so I have a section. I was going to give you a choice. I have a section on female soldiers, like during the Civil War, and one from Wisconsin in particular, that I kind of profile, and also Wisconsin's and Native Americans and their service during the war. So I was going to let you have a choice. But, should I just give a preference to begin with?
I don't have a preference, but the fact that we're outnumbered here, all the females.
Okay. And in taking this, I grabbed this and I realize now that this is like not the final draft. And so if I am ever blessed to read again on this radio show for the Writers Guild, I will use the most recent version of my text. Okay?
Okay, let's take it away, Ron.
Okay. So this is from a section. It's on women. It's a chapter on women during Wisconsin during the Civil War, and then I talk about women who were women with the Army. And there were daughters of the regiment, which were women who were known to be women, but they'd be like a relative of the colonel or something, and they'd be with the regiment. There also were female soldiers, and so this is the section on female soldiers. Right? Although women were prohibited from joining the military at the time, over 400 served as soldiers in the Civil War. It was relatively easy for them to pass through the recruiter's station, since few questions were asked, as long as one looked the part. Women bound their breasts when necessary, padded the waists of their trousers, cut their hair short, and adopted masculine names. How is it possible that women passed the required entrance medical examination? The reality is that medical exams were often cursory. In addition, the prevailing standards of modesty facilitated women disguised as men to avoid discovery. Soldiers rarely bathed, and everyone slept with their clothes on. In addition, ill-fitting uniforms helped hide things. When armies were in the field, it would have been easy for a woman to take care of bodily functions out of sight. In addition, after months of marching, poor nutrition, and stress, many menstrual cycles were most likely interrupted. Finally, because there were so many teenage boys in the Army, a woman's beardless face would not seem unusual. 8 women are known to have fought at the Battle of Antietam, for example. 7 were Federal and 1 was Confederate. 5 became casualties. In terms of Wisconsin, perhaps the most famous was Rebecca Peterman of the 7th Wisconsin Infantry. Known as Georgina in the press, Rebecca Peterman, a country girl from Ellenboro, Wisconsin, served in the 7th Wisconsin Infantry. She is known to have fought at South Mountain and at Antietam in 1862. She enlisted in the fall of 1862 at the age of 16 or 17 and served the first year as a drummer boy. The second year she, quote, did good service with a musket. During her service, Peterman was wounded above the temple. It left her with a bad scar, but did not cause her masquerade to be discovered. After her discharge from the 7th, she was questioned about her motives for soldiering. It was reported that she gives no reason for entering the service other than a desire to see what war was, and to be near her brother and cousin, who were in the same regiment. Her cousin induced her to take the step. Apparently, for 2 weeks her stepbrother did not know Peterman was in the regiment. As mentioned above, wanting to be near her family members was not Peterman's only motive. She was known as an adventurous person. Peterson's former school teachers said that, quote, plain country life was not enough for her ambition. A newspaper reported that Peterman was rather slenderly formed, but with somewhat masculine features, though with a very small and delicate hand. In walk and carriage, she has every appearance of a boy. Another reported that in her soldier's clothes, she has the appearance of a rather good-looking boy of 16. She is of medium height with dark hair and eyes. She is very quiet. Another article agreed that All who have seen this military specimen agree that she is unusually good looking. Peterman's former school teacher remembered seeing her in uniform and said, "She's a fine-looking soldier. In fact, looked better as a soldier than as a girl." Peterman apparently looked so convincing that no one in her regiment, other than her cousin and stepbrother, ever suspected her gender. Interestingly, she said she knew of 2 other women from her same county who were serving in the Union Army. After her discharge from the 7th Wisconsin Infantry, Peterman was on her way home to Ellenboro, Wisconsin, when she arrived in Chicago in February 1865. Her overcoat, in which she kept her discharge papers and money, was stolen at the Soldiers' Rest. Without money, Peterman wandered the streets looking for a warm place to spend the night. She went to a police station and asked to sleep there. A policeman on duty, quote, detected something wrong in the appearance of the soldier. Peterman confessed to being a woman. The Chicago Evening Journal reported the incident, and the story was reprinted in other papers. After praising Peterman for her good service, the Chicago reporter appeared surprised that she seemed to regard her past course as something not to be regretted. Rebecca, renamed Georgiana by newspapers in Minnesota, Illinois, and Wisconsin, was not pleased by her notoriety. When she reached Ellenboro, the local paper announced her arrival. An article in the Platteville Witness noted, "She lives in Ellenboro, is about 20 years old, wears soldier's clothes, and is quiet and reserved. She left home 2 weeks later, after her older sister died in an accident." A newspaper reporter attributed Peterman leaving home due to her mother pressuring her to wear a dress. For more than a month, the travels of Rebecca Georgiana Peterman were printed in Wisconsin newspapers. Peterman first went to the Prairie du Chien, wearing a uniform, and checked into a soldier's hostel. A few soldiers she knew recognized her, and she was forced to leave. She then went to Boscobel and tried to re-enlist. Unsuccessful, she traveled to Portage and tried again. Because Wisconsin newspapers were chronicling her moves, Portage officials recognized her as the celebrated girl soldier of Ellenboro and put her in jail. Reporters from the Grant County Witness interviewed her stepfather, who said that Peterman's, quote, wild, erratic course was a source of grief to her staid, respectable family. He further claimed, "The girl is perfectly uncontrollable." Peterman left Portage and disappeared from the newspapers. One hopes she found whatever she was looking for. So, true story.
It's great. I like when these stories of people you've never heard of who live these kind of incredible lives are revealed. So if your book has a lot of that in it, it's going to be a great book.
Yeah, I mean, I try to tell. I mean, there's new research in here about Wisconsin's African Americans and Native Americans, and I'm trying to tell stories and give information that hasn't been told before. Right? Otherwise, what's the point?
Right. Okay. Well, thanks, Ron.
Sure.
Okay, that was Ron Larson, and you're listening to Speaking of Our Words. And last up, we have some loser with a crummy voice here. That's myself. I'm going to read a couple of short pieces that several months ago I finished my second novel, and I have a couple of scenes that I actually edited out that didn't fit, but I still kind of like them. So before they're forever buried, I thought I'd read them here. Just a couple of short scenes. And here's the first one. It was only a half day, the last day of school in my third grade year. We had early dismissal, and as we ran out the doors into the early afternoon sunlight, a strong wind kicked up out of the west and blew thousands of helicopter seeds off of the gigantic maple tree that bordered State Street. They filled the early afternoon sky, some traveling hundreds of feet as they silently took flight, spinning and whirling, landing on the asphalt of the playground and the dark green and freshly mown grass of the neighboring lawns. And we all ran, all the kids from the old grade school, as if we were helicopter seeds too, set free from the walls of the school by the warm June wind into the early summer air that was never before and would never again be as pure and clean as it was at that moment. It was the most perfect expression of pure freedom I've ever known. the helicopter seeds, and we children, none of us caring about where we'd end up when we finally landed, just lost in release and flight, happy to go wherever the warm wind sent us. Okay. And here's the second one that didn't make the book. Second scene. It was about 11:30 when I walked home through the backyards. The night was dark and cool. There was a hint of impending autumn in the air, even as the night choir of crickets sang its ode to summer. I found the far end of our backyard and stopped for a moment and looked at the house I grew up in. A light was on in the kitchen. I couldn't tell if anyone was still awake or if they left it on for my benefit. The curtains over the sink were drawn, casting a yellow glow to the window. The grass was long and already damp with night dew. I'll mow it tomorrow, I thought, just like I mowed it so many times growing up. It was the same backyard, the same grass, the same dew, the same house, the same yellow glowing kitchen window. It was all so familiar. It was all the same as it had been all those years growing up. But standing there, gazing into my past, I knew that inside was the present, and in the present, inside that house, my father, who had always been so strong, so funny, and so formidable, lay dying, a hollow shell of his past self. It occurred to me that in all probability, the next time I gazed upon that same scene, my father would be gone, and at some point after that, my mother would be gone too. I started across the backyard, walking to the back porch, and I thought of all we'd been through together, the three of us, in this house, in this town. Orchard Depot was a small town, but for all those years growing up, it was a universe, where life dwelled and where death was felt. It had always been a presence, death had, first as little more than a rumor, then as a nightmare in the form of an eyeless corpse in a cornfield, and now as an inescapable and unavoidable reality. And if it was big enough to house both life and death, it was big enough to encapsulate all the time and memory, too. All of time and memory, too. And I looked at our little house in our little town and realized everything that is and ever was is right there behind the yellow kitchen window. So that's our show for this week. The show is a production of the Kenosha Writers Guild. If you have any questions or comments or wish to participate on this program, please visit KenoshaWritersGuild.com and come to one of our meetings. Please visit the Facebook and YouTube pages for this show. Speaking of our words, and feel free to leave a comment. I want to thank Dave Cole and WGTD, Steve Brown and Nita Hunter, and especially our engineer Troy McDonald, and the Kenosha Writers Guild. Thank you very much to all of our guests, Irene BIlak, Kristin Stuckmeyer, Darleen Coleman, and Ron Larson. And this is Dave Gourdoux, and to quote Chris Stuckmeyer, the world needs your stories. We will see you again. Thanks for listening.